Emma sat alone in her childhood home, the house now filled with nothing but silence and memories left unfinished. Her father's belongings sat untouched on the wooden table. Yellowed notebooks, a rusted pocket watch, old letters, unopened for years. But one stood out. A brown, slightly worn envelope, carefully sealed. And on the front, just one word. Emma. Her heart pounded. Her father had never been the type to write letters. So why now? With shaky hands, she broke the seal and unfolded the fragile paper. The handwriting was old, unsteady, but clear enough to shake her world. My dearest Emma, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. But there is something you need to know. For years, I have kept a secret from you. You never asked, but I feel it's time you learn the truth. There was a man. His name was William Carter, and he carries the darkest secret of our past. You can't outrun the past forever, my girl. Sometimes you have to face it. Sometimes you have to forgive. Emma's hands trembled. William Carter. The name meant nothing to her, but from the way her father wrote it, she knew. This man had changed everything. Before she could even process it, her phone buzzed. A notification flashed on her screen. Linda, 7:42 p.m. The town's biggest gossip. Emma, did you hear? James is back in town. After all these years. Aren't you curious why? Emma's breath caught in her throat. James. The man who walked away 5 years ago. No goodbye, no explanation. Just gone. At the time she needed him most. And now suddenly, he was back. Emma looked down at the letter in one hand, the phone in the other. A buried family secret. A past love resurfacing. Both ghosts had come back at the same time. But which one was more dangerous? Emma read the letter again and again. Every word echoed in her mind. The name William Carter refusing to leave her thoughts. Who was he? And why had her father hidden him from her? But then, there was James. His sudden return had shaken her just as much. She needed answers. And if there was one place in town where she could find them, it was Horizon Cafe. The bell chimed as she pushed open the cafe door. The air smelled like fresh coffee, warm pastries, and old wooden tables that had soaked up decades of whispered conversations. But Emma wasn't paying attention to any of it. Her gaze locked onto one spot. James, sitting by the window, stirring his coffee, lost in thought. He looked unchanged, maybe even better than she remembered. And then, as if sensing her presence, he looked up. Their eyes met. And just like that, the years between them vanished. Emma's chest tightened. For a brief second, she considered turning around, walking away, but it was too late. James had already stood up. Emma? His voice was the same, familiar, yet somehow different. Emma inhaled sharply. After all these years, you just show up? Why? James lowered his head. I know I owe you an explanation, but I didn't come back to hurt you. There are things I need to tell you. Emma crossed her arms. Then start talking. James hesitated, then offered a small, almost nervous smile. Not here. Let's walk. She hesitated for a moment. Then she nodded. They walked through the quiet streets. The town looked the same, but Emma felt different. James finally broke the silence. I know what I did to you was unforgivable. Leaving without a word, I should have explained. But back then, I couldn't. Emma narrowed her eyes. Couldn't or wouldn't? James sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Emma, if I had stayed, I would have dragged you into something you weren't ready for. Her stomach clenched. What something? James stopped walking. His gaze drifted toward the darkened edges of town. This place has a secret. And your father? He was more involved in it than you ever knew. Emma's pulse quickened. Her father's letter. William Carter? She asked cautiously. James's expression changed instantly. His eyes widened. Where did you hear that name? Emma's breath caught. Her father and James were connected to the same secret, and now she knew. She had to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. Emma's mind was spinning. Her father's letter, the name William Carter, and now James. Could all of these be connected? She tried to understand why James had left. Had it really been to protect her? Or was that just another excuse? But more than anything, she needed to know. What was her father's connection to this mysterious man? And where did James fit into all of it? They kept walking. The salty scent of the ocean filled the crisp night air as they reached the old harbor. James suddenly stopped, his intense gaze locked onto hers. "Emma, if you can trust me, I'll tell you everything," he said slowly. Emma narrowed her eyes. "James, how can I trust you? You left me, no explanation, no warning, and now you're back, telling me you're part of some big secret. You think that's easy for me?" James let out a heavy sigh, his eyes dark with something unreadable. "I know," he murmured. "But believe me, I had no choice. I had to leave. But now, I'm back. And I won't walk away from you again." Emma said nothing, but inside, something shifted. Anger, longing, and the pain of trying to bury what she still felt for him. No, she had to focus. "My father and William Carter? How do you know about their connection?" she asked, forcing herself to keep emotions out of it. James hesitated, then looked away. "Your father helped me," he admitted quietly. "Years ago, when I was in trouble." Emma's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" James clenched his jaw before turning to face her again. "Before I left, I was working for a man everyone was after, William Carter. I didn't know who he really was at the time. I only knew he was dangerous, and that the information I had could get me killed." Emma's mind reeled. Her father and James had both been tangled up in this. James stepped closer. His voice was low, but urgent. "Emma, your father saved me. He gave me a way out, but he didn't want you involved. He never told you because he was trying to protect you." Emma shook her head. "This makes no sense. My father kept all of this from me? And William Carter? Who the hell is he?" James exhaled deeply. "If you really want answers, Emma." He hesitated, then looked straight into her eyes. "You have to read your father's letter." Emma froze. That letter. The one she still hadn't gathered the courage to open. What was inside? And was she truly ready to know? But one thing was clear. The anger and heartbreak she felt toward James weren't the only things inside her. Somewhere beneath it all, a part of her still wanted to trust him. Her heart was pulling her toward him, but her mind screamed that it would only lead to more pain. And now, Emma had to choose. Emma sat at her desk, staring at the unopened letter. It had been sitting in her drawer for days, untouched, unread, but the weight of it was crushing her. Reading it meant unlocking the past. And what if the truth inside was too much to bear? Her father's handwriting, scrawled neatly across the front, seemed to call out to her, "Emma." Her fingers traced the worn edges of the envelope, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Could there be something about James in here? Why had her father hidden all of this from her for so long? But she couldn't open it. Not yet. A meeting with James. The next morning, James sent her a message. "Can we talk?" Emma hesitated. She wasn't sure she was ready to hear more, but she agreed to meet him. When she arrived at the old tea garden, James was already there, stirring his coffee, lost in thought. As soon as she sat down, he looked straight into her eyes and took a deep breath. "Emma, when I left, it wasn't just to protect you." She folded her arms across her chest. "Then why, James? Why not just tell me the truth?" James dropped his gaze. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled note. He placed it gently on the table. "This was the last message I received before I disappeared." Emma hesitated before picking it up. The handwriting was rushed, desperate. "They're watching. If you care about Emma, leave. And never look back." Her stomach twisted. "What does this mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James swallowed hard. "I worked for William Carter, Emma, but I learned something I wasn't supposed to." Emma's breath hitched. James clenched his jaw. "They weren't just afraid of me knowing the truth. They were afraid of what I might do with it. And when they realized you were connected to me," Emma stiffened. "You put me in danger?" James shook his head. "That's why I left, to keep you safe." Emma felt a mix of anger and confusion boiling inside her. James had chosen to leave instead of fighting for her. But maybe, just maybe, there was a reason. Still, one mystery remained. What was her father's role in all of this. Unsealing the past that night, Emma made her decision. She sat at her desk, took a deep breath, and finally tore open the letter. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the fragile paper. And then, she read her father's words. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer here. But there is something you need to know. Years ago, I discovered something about William Carter, something I was never meant to know. James wasn't the only one after him. I was too. But no matter what, I tried to keep you out of it. Now the past has found you. If you want the truth, listen to James. But remember, Emma, some truths set you free, while others chain you forever." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Her father had been hunting William Carter too, and now the rest of the story was in her hands. But the real question was, could she trust James? Emma's hands trembled as she reread the letter. Her father's final words echoed in her mind. "Some truths set you free, while others chain you forever." What did that mean? Was he warning her? She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her pocket. There was no turning back now. Her father had uncovered something about William Carter, something dangerous enough that James had left everything behind to escape it. But a piece of the puzzle was still missing. Emma needed answers, and James was the only one who could give them to her. A midnight meeting. She met James by the shore at midnight. The waves crashed violently against the rocks, the wind howling through the quiet town. James studied her face. He could see it, the determination burning in her eyes. "I read my father's letter," Emma said, her voice steady. "Tell me everything, James. No more secrets." James exhaled slowly, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small, rusted key. He gently placed it in Emma's palm. "This," he said, "is what your father gave me to protect." Emma studied the key. It was old, worn, and had one letter carved into it, C. Her mind raced. "What does it open?" she asked. James hesitated. "A safe. Your father discovered something about William Carter's past, something so dangerous that everyone who knew about it was either silenced or disappeared." Emma's throat tightened. "And that's why you left?" James nodded. "Yes, your father made me promise to keep this key hidden. I have no idea what's inside that safe, but I know where it is." Emma gripped the key tighter. "Where?" James exhaled. "The old train station on the edge of town. There's a locked storage room behind the abandoned platforms." Emma's heartbeat quickened. So close. It had been right there, all along. "Come with me," she said. James hesitated. "Emma, if we open that safe, there's no going back. Are you ready for that?" Emma met his gaze. She had spent too much time in the dark. She took a deep breath. "I'm already on that path." The safe the next night, Emma and James made their way through the abandoned train station. The air was cold and the night sky stretched endlessly above them. James flicked on a flashlight as they reached the locked door. He ran his fingers over the rusted metal. "This is it," he said. Emma pulled the key from her pocket, her hands shaking as she inserted it into the lock. It turned smoothly. The door creaked open. Inside, dust and shadows covered a forgotten world. Wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with old ledgers and forgotten artifacts. And in the center of the room, a large metal safe. Emma and James exchanged a glance. This was it. Whatever was inside, it had been hidden for a reason. Emma's hands trembled, but she did not step back. It was time to open the safe. Emma's fingers traced the cold metallic surface of the safe. Opening this lock without knowing what lay inside, it was both terrifying and exhilarating. She could feel James's breath close to her. "Are you ready?" he whispered. Without taking her eyes off the safe, Emma nodded. There's no turning back now. She slowly inserted the key into the lock and turned it. Click. The sound echoed in the quiet space. She swallowed hard and lifted the heavy lid of the safe. Inside lay a secret that could change everything. There was only one thing in the safe, an old leather-bound file. Emma picked it up carefully and flipped it open. Inside, she found yellowed papers, faded photographs, and a letter. She took a deep breath and began to read. Dear Emma, if you're reading this, it means you're finally ready to learn the truth. The town you think you know, so peaceful and quiet, has been built on corruption and betrayal. Years ago, William Carter and a group of powerful men received a huge government fund to develop this town, but the money never reached the people. Instead, it was secretly stored in offshore accounts, divided among Carter and his partners. James's father tried to expose the corruption, but before he could reveal the truth, the Carter family made sure he was silenced. James and his family were no longer safe here. That's why he had to leave. If he had stayed, he wouldn't have just put his own life in danger, he would have put yours in danger too. Now the choice is yours. Will you bring the truth to light, or will you let the past remain buried? Emma's eyes widened. James's family wasn't hiding a secret. They were trying to expose one. She lifted her head and looked at James. James met her gaze, then slowly nodded. My father tried to take down the Carters, but then he died in a so-called accident, just like the others who got too close. Emma shivered. This town had been built on lies for years. What do we do with this? She asked, gripping the file tightly. James exhaled. It's your choice, Emma. Your father left this for you. Emma knew the entire town would be shaken if this truth came out, but truth was meant to be told. At sunrise, she walked into the local newspaper office and placed the file in front of the editor. Can you publish this? She asked. The editor's eyes widened. This is huge. Emma nodded. I won't let anyone be silenced ever again. And so, the biggest scandal in the town's history made front-page news. It had been days since the news broke. The scandal exploded, and the old power structure of the town collapsed. Standing by the lake, Emma let the cool breeze wash over her. James walked up beside her. Do you regret it? He asked. Emma smiled. No, everything is finally where it belongs. No more secrets. James nodded. And us? Emma turned to him. For years, she had buried her feelings. But now, she could finally let them out. You didn't abandon me, James, she said softly. You protected me. But this time, we're in this together. Nothing can take that away. James held her gaze. Can you forgive me? Emma reached out and placed her hand in his. Forgiveness doesn't change the past, but it builds the future. And in that moment, James leaned in and kissed her gently. The town's biggest lie had been exposed, but for Emma and James, this was only the beginning.